Hey everyone, this is my conversation with Noah Widmann, a Democrat running for the U.S. House of Representatives out of Florida's 7th District. Noah is a very interesting guy who's running a very interesting kind of campaign that I think can tell us a lot about the future of the Democratic Party. He's also a longtime viewer of this channel, which is kind of surreal, and he's just an interesting guy with some thought-provoking analysis about our current political climate, and I hope that you guys enjoy. Okay, everyone, we are here with Noah Widmann, running for Congress in Florida's 7th District. I'm very excited to have him on the show today. He's a very interesting candidate with a very interesting bio, and I got a lot of questions I want to ask him. So, Noah, thank you for joining us.
It's an honor to be here. I've been a longtime fan, and it's pretty cool that I get to be in one of your videos, so I appreciate you taking the time.
No, that's awesome. I mean, it's really, we were talking about this, but it's crazy to think that someone who's running for Congress has seen my videos, and it makes me want to be a little more careful about the things that I put out there. So.
Or less careful, depending on.
Well, just to get started, I think you have a really, really interesting bio. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about that for someone who might be unfamiliar with you?
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, unconventional bio for somebody, running for Congress. I kind of can start from the beginning. I think that tends to be the easiest place, right? So I was born right here in Central Florida. So the 7th District, for those, that are not aware, it's the Orlando suburbs and a bit beyond. So it's all of Seminole County, which is just north of Orlando. And then it goes off to the coast into the southern portion of Volusia County. So, I was born and raised in Central Florida by a single disabled mom. I didn't know my dad at all growing up. I still really don't. But, that was kind of my background that way. I was raised on WIC and food stamps and in Section 8 housing. That was kind of my whole childhood. And my earliest memory was when I was 4 years old, I saw EMTs revive my mom on our living room floor. And so kind of from an early age, that vital nature of, social programs on healthcare, was always kind of with me. And after high school, which was a really interesting journey for me, I graduated from public school. I had free school breakfast and lunch. And, many days that was my only food for the day. But in school, I was the captain of the wrestling team. I played football and did cross country. And that was kind of an outlet for me, but it was also a path to be the first in my family to go to college. And so after graduating high school, I had a wrestling scholarship to a school in Georgia. It's an NAIA school, but the best way to kind of describe it to folks that are not as in the sports world is I say, oh, it's like a D2 school in Georgia. And on the first day of class, Andre, literally on the first day of class, I got a phone call and found out that I was going to be a dad. And I dropped out right then and there and moved back home and started working at Sonic Drive-In. It was tough. I had 9 months to become a dad. I didn't have an example of what a dad should be. I certainly had one of what a dad shouldn't be. And, worked that job every day. I walked 3 miles a day. I didn't even have a form of ID, but I walked 3 miles a day to get to my Sonic job in the hot Florida sun, which I know you appreciate as a Florida native. And that was tough. I got a job inside finally at Publix. So I was bagging groceries for a bit and decided to go to EMT school, in part because of that early memory that I talked about with my mom. And that was when I was 19. The day after my EMT final exam, my daughter Elizabeth was born. And a couple months thereafter, I started working night shift for the fire department full time. So I did 5 13-hour shifts a week and then did community college in the mornings. At the same time I was doing that, of course, was, doing everything I could in general to make sure Elizabeth would have the life that I didn't have and trying to kind of do what I could for my family in general. Did that for about 2 years and super unexpected, but, I was ready to go to UCF or UF, which were two of my dream schools, as you can imagine, being from the state. And I was ready to go there and unexpectedly got this opportunity. I got a letter in the mail from a school that I'd heard a bit about and decided to take them up on applying. I applied and got into Columbia University as a transfer student, which was crazy. It was a golden ticket in some ways, but in other ways it was, not really guaranteed that I could take it. But like most things in my life, I decided to just run at the brick wall full speed. And, I moved to New York at 21 with I think $15 in my pocket, no laptop, no school supplies. I didn't even have a blanket to sleep on, but I was determined to make it, and started my classes at Columbia, learned a lot, did public health research. I was a biology TA for an upper level bio course, and got to intern in Congress while studying for the LSAT, which was also unpaid, which is really tough. But I got to sleep on one of my best friend's couches. So, shout out to Mike. But yeah, no, I did that and didn't even have a computer. I didn't own a laptop until law school, but graduated with honors at Columbia and got a scholarship to Georgetown for law school. Did well there, enjoyed my time there, made a lot of friends, took a lot of great classes, and did a legislation clinic in lieu of classes my final year of law school. And that was great. I got to help advocate for farm bill policy. So, free school breakfast and lunch, farming agriculture policy, policy dealing with SNAP and NAP benefits, which, NAP being the benefits in Puerto Rico, for example, and a lot of other things in between. And it was really exciting. Today, as an attorney, the work I'm most proud of is my pro bono work, helping folks on their Social Security appeals. My mom still depends on Social Security. I know this is like kind of getting into politicking, and I'm sorry, but I'll just mention that, her still depending on Social Security to this day, and me representing these clients that need these benefits too. I'm terrified of the stuff we're seeing with these illegal government cuts and job losses right now.
Yeah, I mean, what a remarkable life story. Like, oh my God, it's almost hard to believe that sequence of events. But I think it's the kind of stuff that, like regardless of how someone feels about your policy, the life experience that you might want a representative to have, because they'd actually kind of understand more so where working class people are coming from, And I guess your story is so fascinating. And this is something that I've always kind of wanted to ask someone running for office. Is like at what point there, because I know you mentioned like interning in Congress and like taking these policy classes. At what point there did you think that you might be yourself a policymaker in the future?
There were various points where stuff like that had kind of crossed my mind. I think the biggest thing that was crossing my mind was wanting to address a lot of the things that I had seen, felt, heard, and experienced myself. So, when I was a kid, I understood what it was like for my family to just be without and to really be in need of a higher tide to lift our ship, right? So I know for me, on a personal level, that was kind of a little bit of a, kernel of something. I would say it was by the time I was working on the ambulance, and most folks were saying, like, it was awful. I mean, somebody be in a car accident, shot, heart attack, stroke, these are real examples, right? Like, these are people that literally said, hey, how am I going to pay for this? How much is this going to cost? That's a structural problem. That's a very bad thing. By the time I was in law school, a lot of folks had said, you should consider doing this. And it was a thing I had thought about. I really thought that I would have a much longer, pre-political career if I ever jumped into politics. But I think with how urgent everything is now, and with the fact that, and we're going to, I'm going to dive a little bit into the person I'm running against here. But, my congressman's Corey Mills. If you've heard about him, he's the guy I'm running against. He's an international arms dealer by trade. Some people are attorneys. Some people are doctors or flower store owners. He is a merchant of death. And, he's under ethics investigation, unfortunately, for, potentially alleged illegal government contracts. He sells weapons to other countries. He's also under investigation by DC police for domestic violence against a young 20-something woman that is not his wife. And he's also eyeballs deep in international litigation because of his arms dealing. And, I just don't think that that's someone who can represent us. So I think when I saw what he's up to, when I saw the fact that he's never held a town hall in person ever, and when I saw all these cuts happening that are affecting kids like me, I figured I have to run. I mean, it's not just because I'm a Dem that I care about Social Security. If that's cut, that's my mom. If the Department of Education's cut, I went to, I was a Head Start kid and I required the Pell Grant to go to school. I mean, that's kids like me. So, for me, I was seeing so much of what led to this path of mine, my own piece of the American dream, be under attack. And I think worse than Congress actually effectively really attacking these things like they're doing in many cases, in most cases here, they're kind of just sitting on their hands. It's almost like an EMT seeing somebody that was shot and just staring at them instead of saving them. So I think that that's what's really alarmed me and made me want to jump in now. Long answer. Sorry.
Oh, no. It's fine. I think that it makes a lot of sense. You know, I think especially considering your background, the idea to jump into the race now, especially when there are all these conversations about, you know, like Doge and cutting Social Security, cutting government spending, you know, and one of the things that I found particularly interesting about your campaign has been sort of your focus, especially on issues that affect your what would be your constituency, right? Your district. I think that it made me curious. Can you tell me a little bit about your district, the issues affecting them specifically, and why you think you could address them?
Yeah, that's my big focus is right here at home. You know, I think a Florida first focus is key, especially right here in the 7th. You know, for me, a lot of the issues that we're facing that they're talking about on the national news, like the tariffs that are affecting all of us, you know, like the cuts that are affecting all of us. You know, I'd mentioned a little bit about how that's going to affect, you know, people like me, people like my mom, but, you know, it's also affecting folks I grew up with and other members of my family as well that are business owners, right? So, you know, my sister owns her own hair studio that we're very proud of. She's worked her whole life to get to that point. And, you know, she had dropped out of high school just to help raise me because my mom was so sick. Like, I mean, she's someone I look up to so much. A lot of these hair products, you know, the containers are made of a lot of these materials that are being tariffed. She even saw some of that in the first term back in 2017. So, you know, that's something that I'm kind of hearing on the ground is a lot of people that own businesses, they don't know how to plan for the next 6 months, year, even for the next 2 months. They don't know where they're going to store things, even if they do panic buy stuff ahead of time. That's number one. Number two, right here, you know, we're really worried about our homes, you know, whether that's rent being unaffordable, which is not necessarily unique to right here at home, but it hits hard here when you mix that with wages that are not keeping up with the cost of living, when you mix that with mortgage rates that are just astronomical and getting worse because of these tariffs. And when you add to that the fact that Floridians, and you know this personally too, good luck insuring your home. I mean, it's awful. My cousin Michael, who's, you know, he's like a brother to me. Him and his fiance just had their sonogram yesterday, which beautiful, by the way. Just had their sonogram yesterday, but it's like, well, what on earth? Like, they have a home, but if they can't insure it, like, why are they putting this crib together? You know, and that's a fear. Like, we talked about that on the phone, and like, it was hard not to cry, right? Like, I mean, that's a real thing that people are facing. You know, and then a lot of other things that are more unique. You know, we're really worried about, you know, water generally. I know, you know, off the St. John's in the eastern part of my county and in the central part of our district, you know, especially after the latest round of hurricanes, there's a lot of worry about, you know, how folks are going to actually effectively get their water, how they're going to be able to depend on, you know, getting it, you know, after storms. And that includes months and months after storms. That's a big issue a lot of folks are facing. And I think now we're really worried about them talking about potentially cutting property taxes. I mean, that if that completely happens at a wide scale, I mean, how are we going to fund our schools? You know, something a lot of people are worried about too is teacher pay and making sure kids are educated and well fed and in safe and good schools. So that's kind of what we're hearing on the ground, and that's what I'm focused on. You know, on top of these vital programs like Social Security, veterans benefits, Medicare, and now they're even talking about Medicaid cuts. I was a CHIP kid, you know. I mean, if it wasn't for that program, I wouldn't be here. So another long-winded answer, but I'm very passionate about all of this.
No, it's all right. And just to touch on a bit more of what you talked about there, I think that looking at it from a Florida perspective more broadly is really interesting. I've been sort of doing my own thinking recently about the growth and evolution of our mutual home state. You know, I find that here in South Florida, where I live, is a completely different place from when I grew up, right? We have just like a huge influx of people, not to mention like the raised cost of living, insurance prices, like you were talking about. I'm curious on what your thoughts are on the sort of changing face of the state, the kind of rightward shift that we've had in recent years. It's actually fascinating. I would tell people Florida, despite being a swing state up until very recently, hasn't had a Democratic governor in my lifetime, right? So I would be curious on your thoughts on the state's politics more broadly.
Yeah, that's right. The last elected was, of course, Lawton Chiles back in '94 against Jeb during his first run, and sadly, he had passed away in office, as you know, with a month left to go. And Buddy McKay, who recently passed away this year, sadly, yeah, he was our last Dem governor. He was from Ocala, not too far north of here. Yeah, and things have changed. I think there's a lot of stuff we could talk about, whether that's the influx of folks, during and after the pandemic began. We could talk a lot about different changing demographics. I think for me, as somebody running as a Dem and as a Dem that wants to, bring folks together and offer this kind of permission structure to invite as many folks into the tent as possible, I think that a part of it is really just that there needs to be more focus on everyday working people's issues. I think that when you get too high in the sky, things that matter, right? But when you get too high in the sky there on certain issues, whether it's pontificating about the importance of democracy, which I know that you and I both, of course, care about, and so does everybody, people might shrug. If you're talking to a, good and decent working person in, Lake Mary, that's like, she's between her 3 shifts as a nurse, and or I don't know, her husband is off work too, and holding both their kids. If you're talking about democracy, they're going to be like, well, that matters, but our light bill went up. We don't have insurance on our home anymore. And I don't know if we can afford the Florida dream, which you've talked about in some of your videos. If we can afford this dream, because for a long time in a place like this, the dream really was that you could work hard, play by the rules, send your kids to a good and safe school, right? Imagine you live in Oviedo, you work in Orlando. On the weekends, you go to the Springs or you go to New Smyrna Beach. That's a big part of the Florida dream. And I think people seeing that slip away to, special interests, and also not seeing my own party. And I think I do need to take some form of, not necessarily blame, but ownership as someone running under that banner, not really focus on their everyday issues. I think that is also a part of why Florida has kind of slipped away. The good news on my part, back to the politicking again, this district, it's the most winnable in Florida. It's R+5. Most of it's trended the right way because it's a suburban district. If we are going to win the House majority, it does run through districts like Florida 7. The 2 specials, they were very impressive, right? In the 1st and 6th district. I think that there were a lot of great people working on those, and there were 2 great candidates running, with good messaging. But the good news here is that if we perform how they did, we're going to win this thing by 8, right? And so we don't even need that much cushion, but we are ready for the long road ahead, and ideally ready to just win over more Floridians.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on the general there. I'm curious, what does the Democratic primary look like? I know you still have to get through that as well.
Yeah, there's 2 other folks in there. Nothing, to say one way or the other, but it looks like we're definitely going to be the campaign that has the chance to really take on the general, whether it's my own story and connections to so much of what's going on right now. Our strong numbers of volunteer signups and donations and social media shares right now. We're a weekend, let it make it clear that I had my Andre interview my first week running, which is an honor. And I think we've got a real chance here to do something special, right? And it's going to take hard work. It's going to take hitting the ground hard, and it's going to really take more folks joining the fold, which, if I could make a plug, please go to noahforflorida.com, because I definitely need all the help we can get here.
Yeah. Good answer. I think it's been really interesting seeing the way that you've been running your campaign, looking at your website, looking at your messaging, and even I feel like I've gotten a really good idea of your messaging based off of the things that you said to me, the interviews that I've seen you do on other platforms. I'm curious, what is your day-to-day campaigning look like? I know you mentioned town halls, but what does your operation look like?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things. So a big part of it is we're obviously going to have good team calls. So I'm really proud of the team that I've been able to build up. I say that we've been able to build up. this is not a thing I'm doing alone, right? So I've got great people helping me on things like fundraising, on digital, on TV when the time's ready, which we definitely need donations to be able to do TV, polling, and so much more, right? So we do weekly calls. Some of us do daily calls, and those alternate. That's part of many days. The other part of a lot of days is, going to events. So, for example, yesterday, it's not in district, it's just south of the district, but I got to go to the Orange County League of Women Voters event on Hot Topics. They talked about these government cuts. They talked about the kids in schools that, are not sure how they're going to get their next meals. And it was a heavy event, but it was important to go to. And so, I go to things like that as well and try to talk to different people that I can, right? And so that's kind of one thing. The biggest thing though, and this is kind of the behind the curtain view of it, and this is pretty, for better or worse here, the biggest thing is calling friends, family, and strangers, literally just asking if they can contribute, whether it's $5, $500, or $1. It's called call time. And so that's kind of the real biggest full-time job of a congressional candidate is what I've learned in this week. And it's tough. You are truly calling people you don't know and trying to get them to invest in this race. And it's a tough thing. That's kind of most of the day to day.
Yeah, I think that's the highest barrier of entry for working class people, right? There's a famous anecdote that you hear all the time is that when someone says they want to run for Congress, the first thing they're asked is like, pull out your phone, tell me how you could raise $10,000 immediately, and that's just something. Sorry, go ahead.
Yep, the money in politics problem, it's such a big problem, especially post Citizens United, right? Like, we really need to try to rein this in. It's terrible that it's the big ecosystem that it is.
Yeah, but I think it's really interesting to see people funded campaigns, and I guess I'm kind of building off of that. I know that you've been a fan of my channel, and reading up about you, I read that your favorite books are The Years of Lyndon Johnson by Robert Caro, which I could just geek out with you real quick about because I absolutely adore that book series. Those are probably my favorite books as well. I've got them behind me, even though you can't quite see it. But whenever I think of Lyndon Johnson in those books, I think of campaign finance, right? Like a lot of his rise to power involves him having control over purse strings. He's able to fund different candidates, and it's actually very funny. There's like a Twitter account. I wish I knew the exact name of it. That tracks whenever Robert Caro books are found in the background of like some politician's Zoom camera or anything like that.
Link me to that when you find it.
Yeah. Well, I've seen it with like Obama and with different people, and I always think like, man, I wonder what lessons they're taking away from that. Like, I wonder what they're learning from that they're going to use in their runs. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with those books and kind of what from that you bring into your own congressional career?
Yeah, I love that question. And I'm glad that we both share that. He's great. I know he's still working on one now, so we really need to hope that comes out here and that it's going to be good here. So basically, look no further than the first book, right? I think the biggest lesson for me is meeting people where they're at and is working hard. Think about the long drives and the fact that he was going to meet folks way out in what we call the sticks, right? Like in places where other folks might not have driven out to or walked out to. That's my approach, right? And that's both in person, going to events, and also the social media approach I'm trying to have, where I really just try to meet normal people where they're at. I think that's something that really stuck out to me. I think also LBJ's ability to really like have people in his corner that most made sense to be in his corner, but not all of them, right? Like, I think that was such an interesting thing. And for me, it would be a more positive note of like, get people in the tent, right? You might meet someone that say that they had voted for this administration or for Congressman Mills because they thought that prices were going to be lower. Prices are higher. Come into our tent. You're welcome with open arms. Like, we are here to actually accomplish real things like that. I think is something that I learned from those books that I'm applying. I think the other thing I'm applying, honestly, is just being able to genuinely develop relationships with real people. Now, it was interesting because, with like the Rayburn example, was it always for the best purposes? I know that you call him, professional son, right? That's definitely a different approach than mine. But I think what I learned is to really show people that you care, to really make people feel seen and heard. But, nobody's like him. So the good news is we're not doing campaign finance with people having briefcases of cash, it was Connolly, right? Like, it was like who became the governor, was in the limo with JFK tragically in Dallas. Like, he was a young aide, somewhere between your age and my age at that time, like running cash across the state for LBJ. Yeah, no, those are great books, man. And there's a lot of meat in there. But I'd say those are my biggest takeaways for my own campaign.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to hear you say that, and it shows just how much our politics can kind of change from generation to generation, right? I think people such as myself can kind of read those books and think like I don't think I ever want to work in politics personally, despite being someone who is kind of obsessed with this stuff. I orbit it a lot, but it just seems like such a grubby place, right? With the LBJ types, like those kind of really cynical careerist people, how do you think that you can sort of take the very uncynical approach that I'm hearing from you into Washington and work with all of your prospective fellow congressmen that would have their own individual agendas and everything?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head at the end there with their own agendas. I think the irony is going to be this, and it's not all, peachy, right? Because I think one of the reasons that I'm going to be able to be an effective congressman when I take office January the 3rd of 2027 is that people are going to be feeling the effects of the cuts that are happening now and that are coming. And I think that is, and sadly, that's going to help my agenda. Like, I wish that there wasn't this damage happening now, I mean, I don't think it's good that it's going to help my cause of the issues I believe in, because I don't want people to be hurt at all. But I think that pressure from constituents on both sides of the aisle, I think that that's going to actually bring folks into the fold to say, okay, cynically, I'm doing this so I win, the next election, they might say, or these other Congress people might say, but less cynically, let's make it really about the people. And I think that will be a chance to actually flip that on its head and turn it into a positive thing where people can say, well, this is a real chance to know, bright red flashing light. This is something to really run on. So, protecting these social programs, making sure that people come together on the basis of their struggles, of their shared, kind of unity in the struggles that regular people know every day. Sounds pipe dreamy. Sounds like I'm a dreamer. And in a lot of ways I might be here, but I think that there's going to be a chance to show some of these people on the other side of the aisle. They talk about bootstraps. These programs that lifted the tide, they acted as my bootstraps, right? Like, if my stomach wasn't full as a kid, I couldn't have studied. If I didn't have the Pell Grant, I couldn't have given Elizabeth a better life by going from community college to where I am now. So I think that there's a chance in story. And I know that you're somebody that really appreciates stories as well, like of people's lives, to connect with somebody, not just of their constituents, which is literally the most important thing, is the people you're representing that elect you, because they're your boss, but also the stories of their colleagues, which for better or worse might actually give even more credence to the importance of these programs, right? So I think there's something here. I'm just going to be one of 435, but I think that there's at least a kernel of something there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a classic story of the freshman congressman who gets to Washington feeling all important, and then all of a sudden they're very humbled. That's something Lyndon Johnson himself didn't particularly care for about being a congressman, right? But I think that even when you think of him, right, like what he was able to deliver with like rural electrification is such a huge part of those books. And I'm hearing a lot from you about your pragmatism, about the ways in which you would work to represent the people of your district. I'd be curious on, I guess, some more specific policy ideas. Like you're talking a lot about protecting social services, like Medicaid, Social Security. Would you be in favor of expanding those? Like, would you be in favor of more of a public option or Medicare for all when it comes to healthcare? What would your specific plans look like, you think?
Yeah, I think the first thing now before we get to even talk into building is there's a couple of things, right? They're already coming for Medicaid. I think we have to stop the bleeding now. I mean, I keep using these EMT references, yeah, we have to stop the bleeding, right? It's kind of like, before this patient can talk about an elective surgery, to maybe fix a very old shoulder injury, they've got to get this bullet wound handled. So I think that that's the first step. We need to actually protect and hopefully they don't get their way and cut Medicaid. But the first thing we might have to do is just get Medicaid funding back. That's going to be number one. Number two, I think we need to protect and build on the Affordable Care Act. So, the things you're mentioning, I think there's a lot of room for debate on, but at the end of the day, we're going to need to make sure healthcare costs less instead of more. And I think one approach to doing that, other than protecting the framework of the Affordable Care Act, it's highly popular. I know, a few years ago, I'm sure you remember the story out in Kentucky, where folks were really galvanized about their support for the ACA, right? I think that that's going to be a vital thing to communicate to folks and say, listen, we don't want these healthcare executives getting richer and richer off your backs, while you're sick and dying. We need to protect what we have now, build on it. There's a lot of ways to build on it. I think one thing to do that the prior administration did well, and I have a lot of criticisms of the prior administration, but one thing they did well was capping the cost of insulin for seniors at $35. I would like to see that done for more medications for every age group. At the end of the day, something that I'm sure we definitely agree on, you shouldn't have to die just because you're poor, right? That shouldn't be a crazy statement to make. And, there's a lot of ways to do it, but the sad truth here, Andre, is that we're going to have to undo a lot of damage and really protect what we have and try to build on it. But ideally, we are, in fact, building on the Affordable Care Act to make more care accessible to more people. Long answer again.
No, I mean, it's funny because very often you're touching on the next question I'm going to ask you before I even get to ask it to you. Because I was actually going to ask. I guess just to preface it a little bit, it felt like 2024 was genuinely a very, very definitive election, right? It was this referendum on Trump in a way that I think, right, 2016, you could say it was a fluke. 2020, he loses, and 2024 is this extremely unlikely political comeback. I think that, number one, it kind of speaks to the thermostatic nature of American politics, right? You've probably seen the video I did about just the pendulum theory of American politics, right? If people have been just unsatisfied with what they have, and we decide to try going in a different direction. But I think after 2024, man, it really felt like the wilderness for Democrats, right? And it's crazy. I don't think I've ever seen the party that lost before, and it felt akin to how some people have described 2004, right? Losing to Bush for re-election. How did we lose against this guy? And I think that I'm curious what you think that those criticisms of the previous administration are, of the ways that they ran the last election, and the ways that you think you could better meet that this time around.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and I don't want to just say, hey, I'm just here to attack the prior admin, but there were a lot of things that were avoidable. I'll start with the things that were good, but to show that I'm fair here. I really think that the capping of insulin was great. The infrastructure bill was great. There were a lot of great attempts on a lot of things. I think antitrust being bolstered was huge, and we really do need to focus on making sure that people aren't getting gouged with a bunch of surprise hidden fees and bills. I do applaud that, but at the end of the day, people weren't satisfied, and they're not crazy. They weren't wrong. All these pundits trying to gaslight people, saying, well, the stock market's technically good, or people don't, if you're trying to explain to somebody that they're wrong about how they feel, it's just wrong, right? If you want to have a working class, good group of broad tent, good party, that's not the way to do it. I think things really fell downhill initially with the Afghanistan withdrawal. Getting less troops, over, in different countries. obviously most people can agree on that, but the way the withdrawal was done, it was a mistake. It was horrendous the way in which it was done. There were a lot of brave and good people there that were hurt and worse because of the way it was done. And I think beyond that, when you add people that worked in the administration just not being honest about the issues Biden was facing with his age, not admitting to the problems going on with things like whether it was like inflation or the border or crime in some cities, or outside of the administration, people coming to Florida and other states. Most people are leaving places that the party I'm, running under controls, like New York and California. People can't afford housing. They can't afford things on their wages, even if the wages, might seem higher. I think that's a real problem that we have to be able to kind of own up to if we mean somebody running under the Democratic banner. And so, as far as what I would do different, I just want to try to earn people's trust, right? Like that's all an election is you're trying to earn the trust of voters. They're paying your paycheck potentially if you win this thing. And I think that they deserve to be told that their feelings are real. Like, they're not wrong about prices being higher. They're not wrong about feeling less safe. They're not wrong about having an issue with the president. I mean, it's the same situation now. Now the president's, still old. It's just a different president with the president being old, and I just don't think that people like to be, either pandered to on the other on one hand, or on the other hand, to be told that they're wrong about these objective things that were a problem. So, I'm looking to be a different kind of Democrat. I really want to bring people together. I really want folks, there's people, it's not just people that I know and love that voted for Trump in this area. It's people with my last name, that I know and love. And I think that inviting as many folks into our tent as we can under that banner of common sense, pragmatism on protecting these programs, on having better wages, better jobs, better opportunities for small businesses, better opportunities for young people. And speaking of young people, having a Congress that's not, like, if you're 90, you're not considered an outlier. Like, that's a problem. Insider stock trading where they enrich themselves, that's a problem. So, banning that and doing term limits and talking openly about my support for that, I think that that's another key here to differentiating.
Yeah, I mean, I just going back to the start of your answer, it's so unfortunate, the mishandling of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, because that was a policy that I was 100% like fully in support of, right? And just the way that it played out, and that ends up being the sort of dip in Biden's presidency that he's never really able to recover from. In a lot of ways, it feels like that we're already kind of seeing Trump's dip in popularity very, very early in his administration with all the tariff shenanigans that we've talked about earlier. And a little further down in your question, I got some hints of the abundance agenda. And talking about blue cities and blue states failing to deliver for people, right? I was curious if you've been keeping up with that and how you've been considering those sort of arguments within your own politics.
Yeah, and good job picking that up. Yeah, listen. I've got the book. I'm not going to say that I ascribe to 110% of everything that Klein had written in there, but something needs to change. Right? Like, if people can't afford a home, if they can't afford to feed their families and, oh my gosh, like build infrastructure to drive on, or to have high-speed rail, which wouldn't that be great to have, more options for people to travel? There's a problem, right? And I think he makes a good point when he says, you've got one side that says, all government's bad, you got to get rid of it all. And then you have another side that says, no matter what, the answer is always more government. We should look at intelligently at ways to address issues with regulations, because there's ways to build and have good housing and good infrastructure that's still safe for the environment, that's not encroaching on people's existing homes, and that is still preserving the nature that we love. I mean, when you and I talk about the Florida dream, like, that includes what I talked about, how on weekends you could, go to New Smyrna or go hunting or go, to the Springs or something, right? That includes that, and I think that abundance, there's a lot of good stuff there, but the answer is not what a lot of these county commissions in Florida are doing, where they're just highest bidder giving developers the free reign to just build a McMansion somewhere that no one can afford, taking away our nature. So no, I ascribe to a lot of it because I think the crux is really problem solving. It's not about left or right. It's not about saying, well, if you're not on the party line, if you don't pass this purity test, we can't support you. It should just be about delivering good change, right? So like if there's an answer that's more housing, I don't care if somebody's a Republican that proposes it. If there's an answer that lowers healthcare costs, I don't care if somebody's a Green Party or a Dem or a Libertarian or somebody else. Like if they support it and it makes sense and it's going to help people, good.
Yeah, I think I'm going to advocate here for the Congressman Widmann agenda to include lowering the Brightline ticket from like $80 one way or something ridiculous, like whatever it is, because oh my God, public transport in Florida is just such a nightmare, and it does get to a lot of what you're talking about, just making these areas more livable for working class people.
But you make a good point, right? Like people should have more options, not less. Like whether it's transportation, sending their kids to a good school where they're going to be safe, going to a good job where they're paid, going to, you know, if God forbid you have to go to the hospital, making sure you can afford to do that. If you have to, you know, go to the store, make sure that you're not seeing the situation now, which right now I'm living and I'm still a working young dad. You know, you're getting the same paycheck every week and the grocery bag gets smaller and smaller. We need to address all of this. So I think it's really great that you're, you know, reading abundance and that you're looking into just pragmatic problem solving.
I guess my next question would really go back to the conversation we were having earlier about the age of representatives and term limits, because I think you've taken some really interesting positions there. Because I know that we talk a lot about lowering the age of our congressmen, of all these things, but then you look at these respective congressmen, and they're all fairly personally popular within their district, right? Like there's a reason these people get reelected, and there's incumbency bias there. Once you're in Congress, it's pretty easy to stay there for a while, right? People don't usually get knocked out, and that's where the argument in favor of term limits come in. But there is also the question of that, to an extent, being anti-democratic, right? I think that I'd be curious on your sort of thought process in coming to this decision that you have there.
Yeah, you know, and I think that there's a great debate to be had on both sides of it, right? Whether it's, you know, my view, which is that, you know, I think we should have more representation, right? Which is just going to be younger folks. It's going to be people that, you know, have lived more here on the ground instead of in the DC Beltway. Or it's the view that says, no, that experience, like there's credibility there. Like if you've got the experience to, you know, bring home the bacon, like, hey, maybe you should be rewarded for that, is what some folks say. And you know, I think it's a valid place of disagreement, you know, with myself and with some of my friends. I think the way I came to my view is this, right? I don't think a congressional seat or a state house or a state senate or a city council or a mayoral, like whatever it is, I don't think any political office, district, or seat belongs to a politician. I think it belongs to the people. It's the people that are working and living there and struggling there every day. And so I think one problem other than this term limit thing, because I do think that we should have term limits. I think that we should have folks that are, you know, going to be younger, more representative and fresh in office, that aren't staying for decades and decades and decades and like getting richer with their insider stock trading. But I also think this, right? There's other approaches too. I think that addressing gerrymandering and trying to actually ban it, no matter what side does it at the national level, I think that that is something that would be good here too, because oftentimes people are not getting competitive elections. Incumbents are being protected because their districts might be based more around them or something, instead of being more geographically fair to a county or a city or what have you. And I think that that's wrong, no matter if it's team red or team blue. But the way I got to that is basically that we're just seeing the effects of these people being in office for a long time. And I just don't really think that we're getting the results we need, even if these are people that are popular in segments or in their districts, or if it's people that have passed good things and they deserve credit for it. We're not seeing a fresh generation of people our age, older, you know, 30s, 40s, 50s even, which would still sadly be quite young for Congress, like very young. You know, we're not seeing those people get elected, which means we're not seeing these problems get addressed. And like, I think that's an age thing. It's also, I think, kind of a little bit of a, you know, where you come from thing. So, you know, I went to Georgetown for law school. It's pretty unusual for someone that's one of the first to finish high school in his family. And that was, you know, like a one of many teenage parents in his family, right, to go to a school like Georgetown. And when I was there working on, hunger policy, on the agriculture farm bill in 2022, my last year of law school, something that I remember, I'll never forget this. And I'm not saying anything bad about the people I went to school with, but most of them, they grew up wealthier. Their parents and grandparents were attorneys and doctors and all this stuff. And we were talking about food stamps, which I was raised on. And I remember pitching, hey, maybe we should work with the Alliance, which was this great group we were working with on this advocacy. Maybe we should work with the Alliance to End Hunger on, their idea for allowing rotisserie chicken to be bought with food stamps. I know that for my mom, that would have made a big difference, especially if you had the rotisserie chicken and then me as the kid, I could throw the Easy Mac into the microwave, right? Like that, but that means a lot to a family. That's a meal. My mom's disabled. She couldn't cook. And I remember saying that, and somebody next to me who grew up quite different than me said, oh, why can't you buy rotisserie chicken with food stamps? And I said, oh, sorry, it's a hot food. And then he was more confused. He's like, what do you mean hot food? And I said, oh, well, you can't buy hot food with food stamps, with SNAP benefits. And I think that that's kind of the crux of the problem, aside from age, is that if you have people that don't know problems exist in power, they're not going to even know to address these problems they've never heard about, right? So I think that that's also kind of where I'm coming from there.
Yeah, I mean, that gets again on the message that we've been talking about all throughout this interview, is just the working class background that I think it seems like one of the strong pillars of your campaign, right? Actually understanding where a lot of your constituents are coming from. And I think that that sort of approach, not talking down to the people that disagree with you, is a very compelling one, right? I think that I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this sort of realignment of the parties in recent years, where Democrats, the party of the working man, in terms of coalitions, we have been more professionally middle class, upper class people, right? More so than working class people, the kind of everyday Americans that did used to make up our coalition. And I do fairly I believe that we have the policies that favor them, but when there is that disconnect there, that's sort of whether that be lawyer speak that you hear from a lot of Democratic politicians. I think Jimmy Carter was the last Democratic president who wasn't the last person on the Democratic ticket that wasn't a lawyer before Tim Walz. I'd be curious if you think that's more of a messaging issue, or if you think there's something in the policy there as far as the realignment.
I think messaging is a big one. I mean, and there's a lot of stuff going on there, under the hood. But I think, God, I mean, we just gotta talk like normal freaking people, man, right? I think something I've been really happy about is when I'm talking to people, whether it's online or in person, I was in Castleberry outside of a Publix talking to somebody, and on the back of her truck there was a Trump sticker, and I remember introducing myself to her and shaking her hand and telling her what I'm doing, and I'm doing this crazy thing called running for Congress, and I told her the policies I believe in, which we've talked a bit about, but is not super unusual for most Dems out there. And she asked what party I was in and was shocked that I said that I was a Dem. And I said, well, what's surprising about it? She said, oh, you're talking about Social Security and jobs and wages and and on supporting equal marriage. And she's like, that, but I'm a Republican and I support that. And I'm like, I'm a Dem and I support that, right? This is, I think that there's a disconnect because, can I just be honest? I think a lot of people out there think that Dems, at least the elected ones, look down on them. I don't think that's okay, right? I keep telling these stories that, but I was talking to my friend John, who drives Uber, and he was saying, I really want the Democratic Party, to be better, I wasn't excited last election, and we should have a party that stands for everyday people, but, I'm worried that, they're a little bit more like someone that would, I don't know, be at a Northeastern College poetry slam, was the vibe he was kind of saying that he was, kind of feeling. And I thought that was such a good point, because if you're not meeting people where they're at, if you're not respecting people, if you're not just talking like a normal person, And if you haven't lived their struggle, I think that's a problem. And the other thing, like, this is a little pundit-y, but I think the other thing is that you're right about, a lot of these like college grads and like other people that used to not be in the fold being a bigger and bigger chunk of the party. We need as many great folks in our corner as we need as a party and me as a candidate. But we really I want all the great mechanics and the doctors and the lawyers and the small business owners and the people that are working 2 jobs, trying to raise their kid by themselves. Like, we need all these good people in our fold. And, I'm worried that there's a feedback loop where when you get more of these people kind of from the ivory tower, that's what changes the way these other Dems are talking, that like isn't the way that like I might talk or you might talk, or much more importantly, everyday people might talk. And so that's something I've been trying to address by just kind of being myself, and not really, I'm not worried about upsetting a special interest group or something. I'm not worried about, if I upset, some specific, demographic that's maybe college educated or something, just because I'm trying to really tell the truth and appeal to as many good people as I can, because I believe that our policies are good, especially my very pragmatic down the middle ones. I think that I believe in a good, robust government that isn't too big, but that isn't so small that it lets people suffer. Sorry, again, that was long-winded, but yeah, I think that that's what it is. We just have to meet people where they're at, respect them, and just tell them the truth. We stand for this. We stand with you. Tell us what is bothering you. Tell us what you care about. Tell us what you think we should do differently. So that's kind of my approach.
Yeah, and I think part of that also just connects to this idea of effectiveness, right? Like, what is a politician delivering? I think for whatever policies that the Biden administration did that I really believed in, like you mentioned the infrastructure bill, like the CHIPS Act was something I was a big supporter of. That's not something that people are going to see the effects of for a very long time, despite them being very good policies, right? I think that Trump, for all of the harm that he's doing, right? Like, he comes into office and people see that he's doing something. And there's that sort of sense, right? Even if he's not doing something I like necessarily, at least he's taking action. I think that it's been fascinating to see the administration push everything through in executive orders instead of legislation, even though that could probably get undone, and especially with things like immigration, it seems like, yeah, it seems like Democrats probably would have met him a bit where he was at on immigration, especially before stuff like Kilmar Abrego-Garcia and Mahmoud Khalil, right? I think that seeing how much power that congressional Republicans and even congressional Democrats have sort of relinquished to him has been kind of shocking, right? Like, congressional Republicans, I don't know if it's a lack of foresight or whatever, but it's like, man, the next Democratic president's going to have a lot more leeway to do a lot of stuff that you guys don't like also. And even congressional Democrats, it seems like there was a kind of feeling of yeah, he got elected, I guess he can do whatever he's going to do. Where do you think that comes from? How do you think we could do something differently there?
Yeah, it comes from a lot of political cowardice. I'm just going to call it out. I don't care if it's a Democrat or a Republican. If you're sitting on your hands and not being the co-equal branch of government that you are, it's Article 1 of the Constitution, spending, tax, declaring war, everything comes from Congress. These tariffs originally came from Congress. The fact that they're just sitting on their hands the way that they are, I think is wrong. I don't give a damn what party it is. And I think that that's something that needs to change. I'm pretty concerned with Corey Mills, the guy I'm running against. He's, when he's not going overseas to try to make himself richer on these trips where he's trying to sell weapons, that he sells, he's basically just sitting on his hands, letting this president do this damage and letting this Congress cut our Medicaid and Social Security and more. So that's one thing that disturbs me. And you were talking about, Trump doing things, Trump getting things done versus the Biden administration, passing some of the, legislation you had talked about. Let me distill it in a way that, you're going to appreciate and that I think most people here on the ground appreciate. Say the damn thing you want to do, right? So I want to combat inflation and lower prices. Are prices too high? Come to my corner. We're going to lower them. We're going to try to build on, bringing insulin costs and other prescription drug costs down. We're going to end the tariff madness and make costs lower. We need to make sure that we fight for American jobs. You can talk about the CHIPS Act. It was a great building block. But when you talk more tangibly about bring back American jobs, fight for our people and for our jobs, that's going to resonate with people, especially when you can honestly say, yes, the tariff situation's bad, but also, yes, it is very reasonable to want to take on China and to want to fight for our industry and fight for our jobs and not let them become the great world superpower, right? Like that's a reasonable thing. And I think that that's one other way you earn respect from people is by being honest about that and not saying that everything that they think that they had voted on or did vote on is bad. Number 3, protect Social Security and Medicare. Nobody wants grandma to be thrown off the cliff, right? And so I think that if we can just talk honestly and like real people about those things, that's huge. As far as why Congress is just letting this all happen, it really is just that cowardice. They're looking out for their own tails. They're not looking out for us. That's kind of it. That's kind of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, you touched a bit on China there, and as we start to wrap up here, I know that you have been talking a lot about representing the people in your district, the issues that impact working class people, but like you're in Congress, you're also going to have votes over foreign policy, and I know that that's something maybe like that the median voter has kind of been expected not to think about very much. Right, but I think in recent years you've seen that like there has been a sense of chaos, especially with the Biden administration, like like wars in Ukraine and Israel and Gaza, for example. But I'm curious what your approach would be to foreign policy if you were elected congressman.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think that chaos is unfortunately the right word. Russia unjustly invaded Ukraine, a sovereign nation, and that's been going on for years now, and there's still killing going on, and it's horrible. It needs to stop. In the Middle East, same thing with the fact that, we still have hostages that need to be released. We still have innocent people in danger, innocent people that are alive today that won't be alive tomorrow. That's wrong and needs to stop. And I think that the approach generally is this. We need to partner with our allies, and we need to actually have a sober view on what it means to say that we're going to be and actually hopefully really be the leader of the free world. Like, what does that mean to us? What does it actually mean value wise? And I think for me, it means this. We make sure that even though you and I, my goodness, we could talk for hours about the problems in history when it comes to global superpower status. My God, we could talk for days, right? But at the end of the day, we know that this is worth protecting, even if it's imperfect. We need to make sure that America is on the top of the world stage. It can't be China and Russia and Iran. Many of our families escape from regimes like that, especially right here in Florida. We can't let that happen. And I think that the only way to make sure that doesn't happen is to end the chaos and show a stable, steady hand. It starts with Congress. It starts with Congress. And, you had talked about those wars. Simply the killing needs to stop, and people should be able to be safe and live normal lives. We don't need to allow this chaos to continue to the point where, God forbid, we have our own troops in the line of danger. That's the last thing that needs to happen. And I don't even like uttering that as a horrifying, possibility, because we need to fight to make sure it never happens. So, that's my view. Honestly, it's about stability. It's about partnerships. It's about free trade. And it's about really making sure that we have more friends and that the friendships we have, we're not ruining. I mean, attacking Canada, what are we doing? Like, that is our closest friend. It's America's friendly hat with Tim Hortons. That's not what's going to make America safe. That's not what's going to make America better. And it's certainly not going to be what ends the chaos overseas that you were talking about.
Yeah, and I guess just to wrap up, final question. We talked a bit about the years of Lyndon Johnson. I'm curious, what other historical books, or I guess even fiction books like novels, have you read that have impacted your worldview and can might change the kind of congressman that you are, the lessons that you take into that job?
Yeah, no, there's been a lot. I mean, whether it's Meacham's books or I mean, there's so many good books on presidents. There's so many good books on presidents, and it's sad that we lost David McCullough. Not too long ago. He's one of my favorite authors. His book on Adams, like, profound. I think that books like that. I think books like the Caro series for sure are things that left a mark on me, because I think it taught me the character and ethic of people that could get things done, right? Whether I agreed with them or not, I think that is something that's been really interesting. I also thought that, I'm trying to remember the name of the author. I feel bad, but the Romney book that came out a year and a half ago.
Oh, I have that right behind me too. Romney by McKay Coppins. Yeah, that's a fantastic book.
Yes. Who I think McKay Coppins is from Utah, by the way, which is kind of cool. So I think they had that connection. But yeah, that book, for example, I think it showed me a couple of things, not just that book, but all these books, but I'll focus on the Romney book. I think what these books showed me is that, if you're willing to actually do the hard work and meet people that you disagree with, whether they're to the right or the left of you, you really could get amazing things done, right? Like, God, think about like Ted Kennedy, for example, like the things he got done under Republican administrations, right? Like, he was able to actually get not the healthcare reform that he had dreamt of necessarily, but healthcare reform done under Republican presidents. Like, that kind of work, I think, is a big lesson I've learned from a lot of the books I've read. The Romney example, I think something I learned, there's moments of courage that he's had these last few years, but I think that book shows he should have had some of that courage sooner. Challenging the nativism in his own party, challenging a lot of these things that are becoming, understatement, but huge problems now. Back in 2012 or 2010 or in his 2008 run, which was, it was different than his 2012 run, to be fair. But I think addressing those things and being a leader that can have a sobering view of pragmatic results and, still your values. You should never, ever give up on your values, but try to actually admit when things are becoming a problem. And right now that problem's, by and large on the other side. But if something like that bubbled up on my own side, I'd be ready to take all the fire in the world, all the ostracism, if it was the right thing to do, calling it out. So I think that's another lesson that I've learned. Too many to name from the Caro series, but I was able to hit on that earlier, and I love that we're both fans of him. And I don't know, have you heard a rumor of when the last one here might come out, or do you not know? I don't know.
Oh man, there was a 50th anniversary article about the power broker in, I want to say, New York Magazine, that was really good, really illuminating. I think towards the end of the book, towards the end of the article, he mentions how people were kind of mad at him because he said he wouldn't let anyone else finish the book. He said if, God forbid, he did pass, that he would let them publish whatever he did have, which I thought was interesting. But he didn't say anything about being particularly close to finishing it or anything. I check up on the status of those books probably more often than I should. But Noah Widmann, thank you so much for joining. It was really nice having you here, and I hope I can have you again sometime.
It was a pleasure to be here, and if I can make that pitch again, please, to all the great fans, which includes me, that are watching this video, please go to noahforflorida.com. I need all the great people I can in my corner here. We're not going to do this thing alone. There's a lot of special interest and dark money being spent on the other side for my Republican opponent, but there's more of us than there are of them. Thank you so much for everything, and it's really exciting to be here.